We begin in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Peace be upon you. Welcome to another session of From the Desk of Ghamidi. We are currently in Dallas, and in this series of conversations, we are attempting to understand from Ghamidi Sahab the responses to 23 questions commonly raised against his religious thought. So far, we have discussed the issues of the beard and parda, the veil or modesty in dress and conduct, at considerable length. Continuing this sequence of objections, today we will explore the topic of fitra, the innate human nature. It is important to note that these objections are being addressed not in a spirit of polemics, quarrel, or accusation, but rather to ask Ghamidi Sahab for a chronicle of his intellectual journey, the reasoning, evidence, and exploration through which he arrived at his views. The objective is to genuinely understand. Our aim is to sustain this discussion with scholarly dignity, sincerity, and civility. Thank you, Ghamidi Sahab, for your time. The third objection pertains to fitra. You have written about it in your book as well, and your perspective seems quite foreign to students of traditional religious studies. The objection raised is that whenever the religion prescribed by God is to be understood, we have always turned to valid sources, the Quran, Sunnah, the established practices of the Prophet, peace be upon him, ijma, consensus, and qiyas, analogical reasoning. But in your book, Meezan, you begin by asserting that religion is that guidance which God the Almighty has first and foremost embedded in a human being's fitra, innate nature. The objection is that this appears to be an innovation. A new source of religion has been introduced. That is, now it would be human beings who define what fitra is, thereby subjecting religion to human whims and limitations. What is your understanding of fitra? How did you arrive at this concept and incorporate it into your religious thought?
This concept is not something I invented. Rather, it has been clearly stated by God, the Almighty, Himself. The entire religious history outlined by the Quran in its initial stages explicitly informs us that this religion is indeed rooted in human fitra. So the foundation of the argument remains the Quran. I have not introduced anything new. Not only is it stated in the Quran, but our entire intellectual tradition has historically acknowledged it as well. However, that is a matter for later elaboration. The first step is to understand what exactly is meant by fitra. What is fitra? How does it relate to us and to our religious knowledge? This must be understood first. Whenever something is created, when it is brought into existence, then, in view of its ultimate purpose, certain characteristics and properties are ascribed to it. That essential configuration is what we call its fitra, innate nature or disposition. For instance, we desired to fly, and so we invented the airplane. In making a plane, its engine, seating, turbines, internal mechanisms, and technology, all these features are tailored toward fulfilling that specific function. The ensemble of those features makes it an airplane. Every element is manufactured in light of the plane's intended function. Similarly, when God, the Almighty, creates anything, He does so in accordance with the purpose He intends for that creature. He created the lion, the cat, the dog. He created birds, beasts of burden, and He also created the human being. Each creature is brought into existence with inherent properties, characteristics, and tendencies. These define its fitra. That is, the essential structure and composition of any being is grounded in certain core attributes. And this set of core attributes is what we refer to as the fitra of that being. When we study the human being, the same question arises: what is a human being? What are those essential attributes and qualities with which the human has been created? Which of these qualities are shared with other creatures and which are unique to humans? The term fitra is used as a shorthand for this comprehensive set of qualities. And it is this very concept which is not only fundamental to religion, but forms the basis of our entire intellectual and epistemological tradition. To understand anything properly, one must first grasp its essence. For example, zoologists who study animals also speak of the fitra of animals. They analyze which primary features, innate capacities, and biological instincts God, the Almighty, has placed within a given species. What are its inherent abilities? On the basis of this analysis, knowledge about animals is generated, and this becomes the field of zoology. If we wish to utilize animals in any way, these inherent characteristics are what we must study first. So your entire life and all your decisions, in one way or another, depend upon an understanding of fitra. If your understanding is flawed, your decisions will also be flawed. But if your understanding is accurate and balanced, and if you proceed in accordance with the rules of fitra, then your decisions will be sound. This is the very foundation of critical thought as well. Let me offer a simple example. Suppose I say that the creation of zoos is unethical. This claim is based on the argument that when we analyze the fitra of animals, we find that they require a particular kind of habitat. When they are confined in cages, they are being forced into an unnatural condition. That is, they are being made to live in a manner that contradicts their fitra, and thus this becomes an act of injustice. So even moral decisions must be grounded in this conception. Fitra is also the basis of human communication and interpersonal relationships. When we analyze the human being, we discover that he seeks justice. He desires fair treatment from others and does not wish to be wronged. These are natural human claims. Upon examining human fitra, these postulates emerge, and it is on their basis that we judge a nation to be tyrannical, or a political party to be unjust, or an individual to have transgressed moral boundaries. These judgments are all rooted in our understanding of fitra. Without engaging in the inquiry of fitra, there is no rational basis for critique in this world. A major philosophical tradition emerged in the modern era called Marxism. If you study its theoretical foundations, dialectical materialism, class struggle, how socio-economic conditions shape historical events, these all carry great intellectual weight. Based on these premises, Marxists undertook political projects. They established states on the basis of their ideology. In fact, two major such states were created. The central critique against these experiments was precisely that what transpired within them was contrary to human fitra, and we still maintain the same critique. Those states eventually suffered immense crises. A vast union was formed, but ultimately disintegrated. This collapse occurred within living memory. If you begin to critique these events, your point of departure will be, they violated the human fitra. Had the state been consistent with human fitra, there would have been no existential threat to it. Since it was not, its collapse was inevitable. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that we determine what the human fitra is. Whatever field or issue we confront, our inquiry must begin from this point. Now, the next question, and indeed the one you must ask, is that what is the method for determining fitra? That is, how do we decide what constitutes the fitra of an animal, or to use synonymous terms, its instinct or nature? Mere assertions are not sufficient. A rational foundation must be developed for the method by which fitra is to be determined. The question of what its religious foundation is, whether God Almighty has based His religion on it, and what the Quran states on this matter, these are issues we will examine step by step. But the basic answer to your objection is this. This is not my innovation. It is the explicit declaration of God, the Almighty, Himself, that He has founded His religion upon human fitra. We will look at where this is mentioned in the Quran, and we will reflect upon the verses in which this is asserted. From that, my position on religion will become clear to you. But before that, it is imperative to understand what this entity called fitra is. How do we grasp it? How do we determine it? Because the inquiry into human fitra, the method of discerning it, distinguishing it from other branches of knowledge, and treating it as a distinct criterion, this is not a concern confined to religion. Rather, it is an essential matter in our daily lives, in our intellectual disciplines, in our moral critiques, and in the decisions we make. This must be understood. But before we proceed further, If you have any questions about these foundational points I have presented, please feel free to ask.
The first question that naturally arises here is this. When we claim that religion or any philosophical system pertains to human beings or animals, we must first understand how these beings function. Until we comprehend the mechanism by which they operate, we cannot clarify the relationship between such systems and their subjects. So the fundamental question is, how do we come to know that human beings possess an intrinsic mechanism operating from within? How did we even arrive at this discussion? Why can we not simply say that as human beings gather information from the external world through influences, environment, and habits, a particular temperament forms within them? Why then have we moved toward determining a fitra, innate disposition? How and why did we enter this domain?
Because the tools we possess for acquiring knowledge establish a rational standard for us, and it is upon that standard that facts are discerned and understood. What are these tools? Let us examine them. The very first medium is experience and observation. I have been endowed with senses through which I perceive the external world. Whatever exists around me, if I have eyes, I see it. My ears perceive sounds, and my sense of touch registers contact. These sensory faculties have been given to me. Why? They create a link between myself and the external world. At the same time, they also connect me to an internal mental world. So, on one hand, I observe what lies outside of me. On the other, I observe what lies within. There exists an inner world inside me too, and for that world, I have been given faculties as well. This is called experience. But where do experience and observation begin? They begin with myself. The first sight of experience is my own self, not some external location. As soon as I gain consciousness, I begin encountering the external world. The objects that appear before me, I become familiar with them. My eyes see them. Issuing a judgment about them comes later. But I see them, my ears hear sounds. In the same manner, I examine my own inner self. I listen to the world within me. I feel what is taking place inside. Both these, inner and outer, are the basis of my personal experience and observation. In the terminology of philosophy, this is called subjective knowledge, that is, knowledge as it becomes known to me. Thereafter, it must be transformed into objective knowledge. Within the domain of my personal existence, I have my senses. Through experience and observation, I acquire impressions. Let's say I am sitting in a forest near some burning coals, engaging in penance. That knowledge is still confined to myself. But when this understanding must be communicated and transformed into science, it has to go through the next stage, inductive reasoning. All our disciplines of knowledge are formed in this way. So, experience and observation disclose certain facts to me, whether about the external world or the internal one. After that begins the process of induction. How does this take place? We begin on a wide scale by observing human beings. We engage in exchange of ideas. The experiences and observations I gather are conveyed to you and yours to me. This mutual communication leads to the process of induction. And when we find that, generally speaking, people are doing what we do, feeling what we feel, or that their experiences match ours, then from this relation of communication, we classify such knowledge under an established category. For example, we say, the sun rises every day. Now, if you reflect on where that knowledge originated, it began with my experience and observation. And yours? This is how such knowledge becomes established. Once the shared experience goes through the process of induction, it becomes a recognized fact. All our disciplines of knowledge emerge in this way. Whether the natural sciences or the social sciences, all have evolved by following this process, meaning whenever you pick up a subject to study. For example, zoology studies animals. Biology studies living organisms. What is discovered through experience and observation, we look for patterns and commonalities. When we discover them, we analyze further. In this process, we may also collect large volumes of observable data from which exceptions may arise. What are these exceptions? How do they relate to the rule? How should we revise our hypothesis accordingly? All of these are part of the same process. If you consider it carefully, this is essentially a study of the fitra, innate nature of things, of creatures, and of human beings. When this study is conducted systematically through induction, it leads to well-ordered conclusions, and these, in turn, give rise to what we call knowledge. Whether it be sociology, economics, biology, or the study of the animal kingdom, all these disciplines are born from this very method. It is not as if knowledge is revealed to us from the heavens regarding these sciences. It is indeed true that human beings have been granted the capacity to engage in all of this, and it is by virtue of this God-given capability that we act. That ability has also been granted by God the Almighty to a fly, a donkey, or even to the simplest single-cell organism. Each of these creatures acts in accordance with its fitra. Whatever lies within you, its relation to you, is revealed through experience and observation. When you pass judgment upon it, language is born because you wish to explain it. And this gives rise to the relationship of communication. Now the conclusions of your research, drawn through induction, go through a process of classification. The more advanced and wide-ranging your method of induction is, the more expansive your knowledge becomes. Take the example of the very situation we are currently discussing. A disease, a pandemic, has spread. It has been named coronavirus. Even the act of naming it, if you notice, is based on experience and observation. Then we examine its effects, how far it spreads, and by what means it is transmitted.
What is the innate nature of corona?
A whole body of research is underway to determine exactly that. At present, you would have seen that contrary findings also emerge. This creates an entire world of reasoning and counter-reasoning. Every discipline undergoes these very stages in its development and organization. Then it is subjected to a process of separation, that is, irrelevant or unrelated elements are removed. Where there are errors in observation, those are corrected. Gradually, it becomes a coherent and complete field of knowledge. All the medicines from which you benefit, all the various forms of treatment, they have all come into being through this very method. Take any field of knowledge, whether it be modern economics, sociology, or the natural sciences, all of them have been systematized through this method. At one stage, another element is added to this. You collect facts based on experience and observation. After that, begins the process of drawing conclusions, and this is the rational process. Here you employ deductive reasoning, meaning facts begin to establish something with certainty. When you state those definitive conclusions, that is called inference or logical deduction. So the entire procedure should be understood. First comes experience and observation, then induction, drawing general facts from repeated cases, then deductive reasoning, arriving at logically certain conclusions from those facts. I would stress again that conclusion can still be incorrect. Often, reasoning drawn from induction turns out to be flawed. That is why scientific knowledge is constantly under review. Social sciences also keep reassessing their findings. Their premises are reanalyzed again and again. Even the data gathered through induction is continuously reevaluated. And the conclusions drawn through logical deduction, their internal coherence is constantly scrutinized. This ongoing critique is what leads our knowledge to advance. Suppose you see something and another person comes along and says, "You made a mistake in your observation." Thus, critique begins at the very first stage. Or the critic may say, "Your inductive reasoning was flawed." This is critique at the second stage. He may say, "Your facts derived from induction were sound, but your logical conclusion is invalid." That is, the two do not correspond. You have presented a hypothesis that is a leap too far from the data. Imagination has intruded. These are the methods by which criticism is made. What is the aim of criticism? To evaluate the methodology of knowledge and to identify its errors. Once those flaws are clarified, knowledge moves forward. because it undergoes re-evaluation. Wherever critique has pointed out a problem, you revisit that point and attempt to correct it. This is how all disciplines of knowledge are built. In truth, without the concept of fitra, we cannot even begin the conversation about knowledge. If you wish to speak about human beings, the discussion begins with fitra. If you wish to speak about religion, that too begins with the very same term. The same holds true for sociology, or when you wish to speak about human relationships, that too begins with fitra, innate human nature. The same applies to politics and economics. No discipline begins its discourse on any other foundation. At most, one may allege against me that I have applied the principles of general knowledge disciplines to religion. To this I will respond, I have done no such thing. It is the Quran itself that has done it. Just as all the disciplines I have cited begin with fitra, the Quranic discourse, which is also a body of knowledge, likewise begins with fitra. It proclaims that this is divine knowledge being communicated to you, and that too begins from the premise of fitra. As I have said, we will discuss this further from the Quranic perspective later, but the point I made, its rational aspect is that every discipline begins with fitra, and its religious aspect is that the Quran confirms the same. So, from the standpoint of logic, no field of inquiry can begin from any other principle. If you can show me any subject matter that starts from another foundation, I would revise my position, but you will not find such a case. It simply does not happen. Every discourse necessarily begins here and must pass through the three stages we discussed. First, your and my experience and observation. Second, the relationship between our respective experiences leading to induction. Third, the drawing of conclusions through logical deduction in order to systematize it into a discipline. This process applies universally. I will reiterate, you cannot make even two coherent statements about any subject without this method. Therefore, what I have said is not novel at all. I have merely stated that our religion too follows this same method, and the evidence I have provided for this is the Quran itself.
The tools of knowledge you just described, the very tools that compel us to examine the structure of creation, to study our internal being, and to analyze our fitra, the first among these is experience. You had cited the example of the coronavirus. Let me offer a simpler example from my own life and ask your thoughts. If I were born in Delhi, naturally I would only be able to observe myself and my surroundings once I reached an age of awareness. At that point, I am taught that when elders enter a room, I must stand up to greet them. So in my experience, etiquette and respect come to mean standing up when elders are present. This is what my experience and observation affirm. But this experience and observation, it seems, was instilled into me from outside. Both these factors cannot emerge from within me, for I must first learn language, attain awareness, and be born into a society. So, wouldn't you say that experience and observation are external processes? How can they be considered internal?
That is a very important and thoughtful question you've asked. After studying all the living beings that we possibly could, we have reached the well-established conclusion that unless a creature possesses the inherent power and capacity to act, external prompting will not lead to anything. You must possess the internal ability to do a thing. You say that a human can learn something that presumes he possesses something within that can be actualized. You could spend your entire life attempting to teach a donkey that he must rise to his feet when an elder enters the room, but that ability simply cannot be cultivated in him. In human beings, however, such potential is already present, even from early childhood. I often give this example: the fundamental religious truths, you must observe them in your children. When discussing the unique features of the human being, I have often said that human beings are endowed with a moral sense. In the same way, we are also endowed with an aesthetic sense. Let us observe this in our children. A child is born to us, and some people have puppies and kittens born to them as well. Has anyone ever succeeded in cultivating an aesthetic sense in those animals? Have you ever seen in them a sense of morality awakened? Yes, they can learn a few routines and commands, But compare that with a human child. When a child begins approaching an age of awareness, you start to teach them that some things are determined by right and wrong. And usually, you start with only a handful of examples. But once the child internalizes these two values, right and wrong, and learns how they are applied, you will observe that the child begins applying them to new situations on their own. From this, we can infer that human beings have been granted this potential within themselves. It is triggered, of course, by external stimuli, just as all disciplines of knowledge arise through this same interplay. But it is already present within us, and what is already in us is what is revealed. Now, sometimes, because humans have also been granted free will and choice, and because their fundamental affairs are often of a conflicting nature, one or another aspect may be brought to the fore by an external factor. Thus, conclusions may vary, but the capacity lies within us, and it is that capacity that allows those conclusions to be formulated. For example, no matter how devout a Hindu or a Muslim may be, they cannot make their pet Hindu or Muslim. Only a human child can become that. This is why your being has been given that faculty, which I have often clarified in my writings and further elaborated by referencing Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, that we are born with a kind of instinctive or innate knowledge. It is not the case that knowledge lies outside of us. Objects exist outside us, yes, but the faculty of knowing, the animating principle, resides within. When we encounter the external world through experience and observation, and the internal world through reflection, the facts that appear before us, we are equipped to pass judgment on them. And then comes the stage of communication, for which language is required. When we begin communicating about these realities, your knowledge, your research, your observations reach me and mine reach you. This is how knowledge advances. And when centuries of research and observations accumulate, we find that entire libraries are produced. But have you ever seen dogs, cats, donkeys, or lions establishing libraries? Have any of the millions of other discovered creatures built civilizations? Why not? Do they not eat and drink like us? Do they not have instincts of fear or self-preservation? Indeed, many of these instincts are shared with humans, but what they do not possess is the ability to extract knowledge from the world around them. It is this capacity, the one that enables us to develop disciplines of knowledge, that has been granted to us. It's not as if once I've collected data from my experience and observation and subjected it to inductive reasoning, a revelation comes from the skies to tell me this is called economics, that is called sociology, this is social anthropology. No, the revelation that was meant to come already did with my birth. It lies within my being. I have been endowed with that ability, I possess that virtue, and it is already present within me. Yes, it needs an external stimulus, and that stimulus may arrive on the very first day, and then knowledge begins. Today, we actually receive knowledge with its entire history behind it. That is, it has already passed through centuries, which is why, in many cases, we begin at the 10th or 20th or even 10,000th step of an intellectual tradition. And you might say, as soon as the child is born, he begins receiving beliefs and concepts from his environment, and that is true. But I would respond, he also possesses the extraordinary capacity to challenge all of it, and he can absolutely do so, as if being born anew. He will go through the entire process again. He will re-establish relationships between things via induction. From there, he will return to the principles of fitra. So the challenge can arise either from within or through external knowledge, meaning either my inner being will reject a claim or external facts will clarify that the claim is false. This is why so many errors are also committed in our knowledge systems. Take philosophy, for example. Those familiar with its history know that, at one point, its foundations were built on zan, conjecture or imagination. Now, imagination is not a trivial thing. You know that it is imagination which enables a person to write a novel. and for hours he can transport you into his imagined world. He narrates a story, and as he presents it, you forget your own surroundings. You must have seen science fiction, the kinds of worlds and visions that emerge from the ideas and imagination of human beings. A new world is created because humans have been granted that faculty. When one constructs the plot of a novel or presents science fiction or tells a story, if you are not told that it is a story, it seems entirely real. This is exactly what happened in philosophy. The same faculty, imagination, was systematized into conjecture, and on that basis a picture was painted claiming definitive proof about the world. How is reality established? How does plurality emerge from unity? What is the structure of existence? All of this was the outcome of conjecture. Just like science fiction or a novel, a world was created, and this world was particularly embraced by the idealists. Now the question is, what is it that can challenge such a world? Precisely those two things, experience and observation. Once you measure these ideas against the yardstick of knowledge, that's where you begin. Whatever has been claimed, does your internal self confirm it? Does the external world bear witness to it? So you begin with experience and observation. What results does induction yield? That is, when you study whether others share the same experiences and observations that you do, you are entering the realm of induction. The discipline called statistics, what is it? It is precisely this, the collection and analysis of data through surveys. That too is induction. And of course, induction can also lead to errors, sometimes even significant ones. But despite all this, these are the only tools of knowledge that we possess. By employing these tools of knowledge, we derive conclusions from them. Do not be under the impression that this only applies to things which we can verify through concrete, empirical proof. Take, for example, a headache. The entire world recognizes that headaches occur. Medicines have been invented to treat them. But the headache is fundamentally an internal sensation that I feel, a personal experience. And this internal feeling, I communicate it to you, or you convey it to me. So much so that this internal phenomenon becomes a universal truth. Humans experience headaches. Beyond this, consider the pain of the heart. Poetry has been written about it. Here, imagination also enters the scene, what we call the pain of the heart. It is possible that upon scientific examination, it may be proven to have no physiological basis, or that it is simply a metaphorical expression. These are all realities that unfold in the world of knowledge. This is how knowledge comes into being. You study the fitra, the innate nature of a thing. In fact, whether you are studying soil or mountains, or the natural sciences in general, in all such disciplines by which we examine the world, the process begins in the same way. Facts are gathered through experience and observation. They are then subjected to inductive reasoning, that is, collected and analyzed on a wide scale. After that, conclusions are drawn from them through logical deduction. These conclusions are repeatedly re-evaluated, refined, and classified. And eventually, we say that a systematic discipline has come into being, but this does not mean that it is the final and unquestionable truth. It always remains open to critical review, and the process continues. So, the essence of what I am saying is this. Without the concept of fitra, knowledge cannot even begin. Any discipline you care to mention, it begins here. Its claims are organized through this foundational principle. If the discipline is to sustain itself, it must proceed along these lines. And if it collapses or ends, it is also at this point that it will do so. Religion too is a discipline of knowledge. It also begins from the same foundation. And I say this because God Himself has said it.
You have answered my question in great detail. So it's not that experience and observation create a person's fitra, but rather that they create the opportunity for fitra to manifest. Now, you used a term, instinctive knowledge. My question is this. When you said that human beings are born with instinctive knowledge, Did this itself become known to you through experience and observation by inductive reasoning, or is this conclusion itself the result of logical deduction?
It is exactly through that method. We are always making judgments. When we observe that three angles are formed by the joining of three lines, we call that shape a triangle. We differentiate it from a square. Here we've formulated a rule. But where did this ability to formulate rules come from? It came from within us. This is the innate faculty of judgment that has been given to the human being. And it is this faculty that provides the very basis of knowledge.
But the concept of a triangle, that was first taught to me from the outside, wasn't it? And only then did I make that judgment.
What you are describing now is the rule that has already been established and which is now being taught to you. When you attend school and your parents ensure that you learn what is happening in reality, you are being given the knowledge that has already been created, knowledge that has been accepted and inherited. What I am describing is how that knowledge was first brought into being. What is the method behind it? There are many disciplines that were created in the past. In order to understand their origins, we must go back in time. A good way to understand anything is to study the knowledge disciplines being created today, because they are being constructed before your very eyes. When a discipline is established and it satisfies our intellectual standards, we accept it as a proper field of knowledge. Take Newton, for example. He saw an apple fall from a tree. Apples had fallen before, of course, but it was as a result of that observation that he made a deduction.
Yes, it was the result of an observation.
Exactly. But that observation then underwent a process of induction. What did that falling apple signify? Not merely that apples fall, but that every object falls towards the earth. Now, to determine this, Newton didn't have to travel anywhere or perform some extraordinary experiment. It was part of his everyday observation. It was being observed on a massive scale, yet no one had reflected upon it. Now, when a general rule was formulated, it was created within the mind. Everyone had been witnessing this fact, but now a logical deduction was drawn from it. That deduction was applied to all bodies with mass. What is this then? This is also inferential knowledge. It follows the exact same method. An individual made an observation, confirmed it with others, and verified whether the same observation was shared. Do all objects fall downwards? This is what was examined, right? So when you analyze anything, you will eventually arrive at the conclusion that you possess within you a certain capacity. What is that capacity? It has two dimensions. The first is the ability to make an initial judgment, which allowed you to recognize the falling apple as an instance of a more general principle, and then, based on that observation, to bring order and structure to the information from which a conclusion is derived. That conclusion comes through logical deduction, meaning if one object falls under a rule, then another similar object should also fall under that rule. This process, when it remains direct and concrete, with no interference from the imagination, is known as explicit analogy, and this is what constitutes sound inductive reasoning. From this accumulation of judgments, knowledge is born. So, when you study the disciplines of knowledge, you can take any discipline, you will see that it proceeds through exactly these stages. The conclusions that are now taught in schools, they were first accepted by going through this process. And once accepted, they were systematized into disciplines and then transmitted. When a student today learns such knowledge, he thinks, I was taught this from the outside. But in truth, there is a whole history behind this knowledge. When you look backward, you will find that history, and you will see that no discipline exists without having undergone this process. It is always the same. And when we see that this process repeats again and again, we make a further deduction that the knowledge we have inherited was also born in the same way. There is no reason to conclude otherwise. Even now, thousands of disciplines are emerging. New facts are coming to light every day through observation. Every day, induction is occurring. I gave the example of the coronavirus. Right now, it is a global crisis. It is going through the same stages. It is being studied, observed, patients are being treated, their outcomes are being analyzed. What is happening? This is induction. Once that process completes, conclusions will be drawn and systematized. Eventually, that knowledge will appear on the desk of every doctor. It will be taught and integrated into medical colleges. A defined disease, its treatment, its causes, its mode of transmission, all this will become part of a discipline. But how was it created? It is being created right before your eyes. Study how it is being born. Now go back in time. Whatever medicines have been invented, whatever literature has been written on various diseases, it all underwent this same method. When I was young, and since my father was a doctor, I read many books on medicine. Books that were considered classics, such as Avicenna's The Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, and others. When I studied them, I observed that they too underwent this same process. A villager, a Bedouin, or a nomad, they would recount their experience and observations, or you would observe something yourself. People would say, "This is what we've tried in our family over generations." What does this mean? It means the method or medicine was repeated again and again and consistently produced the same result. That is the first stage in how we arrive at a decision about a medicine. You must have heard, even just a few days ago, someone announced that a certain drug was proving to be highly effective. How did they know that?
Through experience.
Exactly, through experience. And from there, induction. Initially, that experience was with one person, then two, then more. Eventually, the observation was repeated across multiple regions. When it is observed across the world, a conclusion is inferred. That is when we say it has become knowledge. But as I said earlier, it is not as though this knowledge is immune to challenge. It always remains open to scrutiny. I remember when I was young, there was a very commonly used medicine. It had undergone all the standard stages, observation, induction, testing, and had been released. But then, one day, we heard that the medicine was being withdrawn from the market. What had happened? It was discovered that it had side effects that were harmful to human beings. What does that tell you? That the process of induction had a flaw. Once that flaw was discovered, knowledge was corrected. So, what your parents teach you, what you learn from society, what your teachers convey to you, they are giving you inherited knowledge so that you can build upon it. And at any time, any person can challenge what they've been taught. But that challenge too must go through the very same process. And when new knowledge is born, it must likewise undergo the same stages. That is why the first thing we must understand is, what is knowledge? Knowledge itself is the name of the study of fitra, the innate nature of things. You can study animals or even minerals. They too possess a fitra. You will study them, of course. You can study vegetation, and even plants have a fitra. Whatever you examine, the goal is to uncover its fitra, that is, its essential features, its qualities, its purpose, and the manner in which these are manifested in the world. This is beautifully expressed in the Arabic language. How is it said there? الَّذِي فُطِرَ عَلَيْهِ, meaning that upon which it has been created. Or جُبِلَ عَلَيْهِ, meaning that with which it has been molded. Similarly, there is another expression that employs the preposition man from إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. Indeed, mankind was created anxious and impatient. And likewise, خُلِقَ مِنْ عَجَلٍ, he was created from haste. This indicates that the human being is a creature of haste. He is inclined to make decisions quickly. All these Quranic formulations are in essence commentaries on the human fitra, reflections upon it, and the conclusions drawn from its study. These are God's own statements, and He is the Creator. It is He who speaks, and I am only describing the methodology by which this process operates. The very style of these Quranic verses conveys something fundamental, When something is created by someone, then its qualities, its features, and its functions all stem from that act of creation. For example, when you purchase an airplane, its manual is given to you. When you buy a toy for a child, it comes with an instruction booklet. That booklet explains what the object is, how it functions, what its parts do, what outcomes it is designed to produce. All of this is an account of the object's fitra. Without such an account, without understanding the fitra of a thing, you cannot even begin a systematic inquiry. Show me any discipline that can come into existence without this. How can we speak meaningfully about religion without beginning here? It too emerges from the same starting point.
Ghamidi Sahab, as we are running out of time, I want to ask my final question for today's session. When we say that a child was taught to speak a language from the outside, that society taught him ways of speaking, of expressing himself, and instilled in him rules about basic things, then it seems that he functions mechanically, like a programmed machine. But what if someone denies this and argues instead that everything put into him from the outside is merely a manifestation of what is already within? Meaning, I taught the child not only the ideas of beauty and ugliness, but also the standards by which to judge them. For example, I taught him that fairness is beautiful and darkness is ugly. So, can it not be said that whatever he learned from the external world, including the criteria by which to judge, is what is now being manifested, rather than saying he was simply told and then some machine within him began issuing judgments on everything?
If one wishes to analyze this properly, just compare how a child and a parrot are taught. How does a human child respond and how does a parrot? The parrot simply imitates you, but your child does much more than that. You can give him any kind of input and he will challenge it.
He disagrees.
Exactly, and immediately. I have said before that the moment you give a child the tools, the apparatus, through which he can express himself, then as soon as he gains a hold on it, he begins challenging you through it. You may insist on something. Try placing a heap of garbage in front of him when he's 5 or 7 years old. Then one day, tell him that this garbage is beautiful and just watch his reaction. So this is not a simple matter. You can teach anything to a parrot because the parrot merely imitates you. This is pure mimesis. But the human being has been created by God with a unique capacity. He has been given awareness of these things. So the result is this. You create only an external stimulus for him. When that stimulus is presented, what lies within him, his innate nature, immediately responds to it. It establishes a connection with that external input. And once that connection is challenged or disrupted, you will witness the birth of an entirely new world of knowledge. If it were truly the case that whatever was taught by Aristotle or by the church or by the traditional scholars remained unquestioned, and if children had no capacity to challenge it, then how did you get the Renaissance? How did modern science emerge? How were new disciplines born? Even in our own society today, you will see people openly claiming to critique Western academic disciplines. But how did they acquire that ability? It is the very disciplines of the West that they have studied. Likewise, one may be born in a religious household and later develop an inclination towards secular or atheistic philosophies. Such people abandon religion altogether or adopt another tradition. It is true that if we do not cultivate this critical ability, if we do not nurture it, it may remain dormant. But the fact that human beings possess this ability is undeniable proof. So the point is this. It is not merely a question of what you teach a child. Look at me. I know myself. What did my parents teach me?
Something very different, certainly.
Indeed. I was born into a very different world, a world deeply influenced by Sufism. It was a world surrounded by the presence and charisma of Sufi saints. And the things I read in that world were no ordinary stories. They weren't just tales told at gatherings. They were the loftiest works of literature, masterpieces in Persian, and the great Sufi masters of the Persian tradition, the way they presented their ideas, the atmosphere they created. It was not easy to break away from it. And yet, the critical temperament that God has placed in the human being, it did its work. When that critical faculty activates, what does it do? It begins by challenging the foundational claims And how are those claims born? Through experience and observation? Then it critiques the inductive reasoning that follows. It highlights errors, inconsistencies, or exceptions. Take this. Everyone in the world agrees today that the human being is a rational creature. Yet I can show you not two, not four, but thousands of people who show no signs of reason. They are mentally ill, they suffer from conditions like autism, they reside in psychiatric institutions. So we define them as diseased and ourselves as normal. But what if one day a great philosopher says, they are the normal ones and we are afflicted with disease? That would be a critique of our entire framework. And of course, such a critique would have to go through the same stages: observation, induction, and logical deduction. In our own time, some postmodern philosophers have indeed argued this. What right do we have to call people in mental asylums sick? Perhaps they believe we are the ones who are unwell. So such debates are possible. But I am not presenting all of this to determine what is true and what is false. I am saying that this is the methodology by which knowledge is born.
Yes, this is where it all begins.
Exactly. This is the point of origin. Knowledge begins here. It progresses along these lines, and it is challenged through the same process. So this capacity is inborn. It is intrinsic to human beings. The ability to generate knowledge is a part of the fitra of humanity. This is not part of the fitra of a donkey. It has not been given this capacity. Human beings create knowledge. How? I have attempted to explain that entire process. All of our disciplines, every single one, are born through this same method. There is no exception. Take any discipline, psychology for example. It is derived through observation of behavior, anatomy, and mental activity. It undergoes induction. It is refined through analysis. It produces logical conclusions and becomes an established field of inquiry. Even today, you will find people who say, so-and-so practitioner can exorcise jinn. How do you respond to this claim? You apply the same instruments of knowledge. You demand experience and observation. You say, we have never seen a jinn. Provide proof. Show us one. What is this demand? It is the demand of empirical verification, the requirement of induction. Perhaps that person will present one or two isolated incidents. You will respond, repeat it universally, prove it consistently.
Let everyone witness it.
Exactly. Let it happen in such and such place before an audience. Let scientists observe it. These are the demands of inductive reasoning. After that, we move to conclusions. At every step, this process unfolds in an extraordinary manner. Therefore, we are compelled to begin every intellectual inquiry with fitra. Even something like mineralogy must begin with a study of the fitra of minerals. Let me say it again. This is not just some philosophical lens I have applied to religion. God himself began his revelation from this very point.
All right, Ghamidi Sahab, thank you. This brings our session to a close. In the next session, we will continue this conversation. We will ask Ghamidi Sahab further about this knowledge, this fitra, and what it contains. What kind of knowledge has been placed in the fitra? Is there disagreement within it? And if so, what standards exist for resolving those disagreements? How can we determine what fitra truly is? Many such questions remain. The dialogue will continue. Thank you, Ghamidi Sahab, for your time.
Thank you.